Hello and welcome to episode 65 of the Wisdom from the Akasha podcast. My name is Suzie. I am your host and I am an Akashic Records teacher and practitioner. Before I get into today's topic, I just want to remind everybody that I am going to be hosting a completely free online Akashic Records workshop on the 1st of June, 6 p.m. UK time. And these workshops are a great way for you to come and ask all of your questions and to really start to understand the Akashic Records as a concept and how you can work with them and how they can benefit for you. I do appreciate that 6 p.m. UK time doesn't work for all time zones. I know I have listeners all around the globe, which I think is amazing. But please do remember that if you are registered for that class, even if you can't attend live, you will receive an email after the class has taken place live so that you can catch up on the recording. And if you have questions that you want to put to me, but you are unable to attend live, you just drop me an email with those questions and I will make sure that they are covered in that workshop. My intention with the workshop is for it to be very interactive, for there to be lots of questions and answers, not just for me to be talking at you for the 90 minutes. So I look forward to seeing you all there. Today, I want to talk about 7 things that you need before you start working with your Akashic Records. Okay? And these 7 things are my perspective, my opinion. As an Akashic Records practitioner and teacher, I've taught thousands of people how to work in their own Akashic Records. And I notice that if you have these 7 things, it's going to make your journey much easier. Okay? And I'll get into why that is, and I'll also get into how the ego is going to start to try to come in and interfere in the process. This is very normal. We cover a lot in my trainings about how the ego is going to show up and how the ego is going to try and interfere with the practice and distort your practice. So, the very first thing that you need to be able to start working with your Akashic Records is the belief that you can do it. And I know this sounds like a really obvious thing, but a lot of the time, because of certain programming, certain conditioning that you've experienced, there may be a belief, either conscious or unconscious, about whether or not you are good enough to access your own Akashic Records. Now, I know I will have said this before, but every single one of you has the right and the ability to access and work with your own Akashic Records. Okay? This doesn't mean that all of you are going to want to work with your own Akashic Records and then train to be an Akashic Records practitioner. That's a different calling, and that's okay. But if you're on your spiritual journey and you want to start working with your Akashic Records, there is no reason that you can't. Lots of people will reach out to me and say, well, I'm really working on healing my inner child, or I'm really working on my shadow work at the moment. Does that mean I can't start working with the Akashic Records? And the answer is absolutely not. Of course you can. The Akashic Records and your Akashic Records are there to be a tool and a system that you can use to help you get support and guidance and help from your guides in the Akashic Records to help you through these things and to help you through your spiritual development and your healing journey. There is absolutely no reason at all that you shouldn't be working with them. So we need this belief to start with that I am good enough, I am worthy to be able to access the Akashic Records. If you have a belief that you're not, I would ask you to really dig into where that belief comes from, okay? And to maybe come along to the free workshop and understand that you have the right to access your Akashic Records as much as anybody else that's there, okay? Once you get around a group of people who are starting their journey perhaps with the Akashic Records and you realize that you're all in the same boat, and hopefully that's an exciting thing, but you'll realize that actually nobody is better than anybody else, okay? So that's the first thing. The second thing that we need, and this is not something that we have in abundance in our current day and age, within our current society, is patience. Okay? And I laugh when I say that because our world is so designed for quick fixes, for distractions, for consumption, that patience is very much a rebellion at this point. It's going against what society is telling you you have to be and do. And you'll often find that if society is telling you to do something, actually, the best thing that you can do is the complete opposite. So patience is required on your Akashic Records journey because this is a practice, okay? It's going to take you time to, first of all, go into the Akashic Records, get comfortable with the frequencies that you're going to experience, ask questions, receive answers. It's going to take time. And the more that you practice, the more expansive and deeper your experience is going to be. But to be able to practice, you have to have patience. I've used the analogy before. If you want to learn how to drive a car, you can watch every YouTube video, you can listen to every podcast episode on it. But ultimately, how you're going to learn to drive a car is by getting behind the wheel and driving a car. It's the same with the Akashic Records. And you have to understand that that first time you go into the Akashic Records is going to be different to the second time and the third time and the fourth time. And years down the line is going to be different to when you first started. And that's okay. That's how it works. So having patience with yourself and with the Akashic Records and being okay with taking the time to develop a practice and to develop a relationship with your Akashic Records guides. So we have a belief, number one, we have the patience, number two, and the third is the intention. And this is something that I cover quite a lot in class, but we have to understand that our intentions, so the reason why we want to go into the Akashic Records do matter and they are important. Our intention behind all of our spiritual practice is important. And what we want to ensure when we are going into the Akashic Records is that our intention is to access information or healing, depending on what it is that we're going in for our highest good and the highest good of all. Okay, so this intention setting is included in the prayer that I teach, but just taking a couple of minutes before you start your Akashic Records practice to make sure that your intentions are good, okay? If you want to go into the Akashic Records and there's an egoic intention behind it, so for example, you want to go and spy on your ex-partner or you want to get some information that's going to make you famous, this is not good intentions. So we have to just be really clear with, okay, what's the intention of this particular practice? And is it coming from a place of my highest good and the highest good of all concerned? Okay, bad intentions, you won't get into your Akashic Records because they're not something that's to be used by you. They're a practice and a modality that you're in this cooperation with. Number 4 is the openness to receive, and that is to receive whatever comes through. You may have a preconceived idea about what the answer to your question is going to be, and that's okay because you're human and that's normal, but also being open to just allow whatever it is to come through. One of the things I encourage all of my students to do is to be very open, to be very relaxed, to be laid back, and to really have fun with going into their Akashic Records. And what I see a lot of the time is that first couple of times when they go in, they have this openness, they have this, let's just see how it goes type of attitude, and they get information through, they get visions through, they get audios through, however they're going to receive. And then after a few times of doing it, the ego creeps in. And what happens is they start to expect things in a certain way. So they've dropped this openness to receive however things going to come through. And they've started to become very expectant into receiving the way that they believe they should. And this is very normal. It's a very normal part of the teachings. And we go through this a lot in class. But understand that the more open, the more fun, the more laid back you can be in this approach and just seeing what happens, dropping those preconceived ideas as much as possible, the better your experience is going to be in the Akashic Records. And this is hard to maintain because the ego is going to come along and try to disrupt it, but that's okay too. That's a normal part of the process. Number 5 goes along with number 4, really, in the respect of this willingness to drop the need to be right. And this goes hand in hand with surrender and the ability to surrender being a key practice. in your Akashic Records. Okay. I've separated this out because openness to receive and surrender are two different things, but they do go hand in hand. And this surrender is this ability to open yourself up to receive, so to channel, and then to be okay with the aftermath of that, where again, the ego is going to come along and the ego is going to start asking questions like, well, was that right? How do you know? Where were you getting that information from? It's going to do all of that. And this, again, is completely normal. Okay. But the more that you are practicing surrender, the more that you are opening yourself up to higher frequencies throughout your everyday life, the more you're going to find that you're able to channel, you're able to receive, and you're going to drop this need for it to be right. Okay. That need for it to be right is very egoic. And it is, again, absolutely normal and something that comes up a lot with my students. And I talk in the class about how we can work through that. The next 2 points are a little bit of the more practical aspects. And number 6 is going to be, you need to have a resonant frequency, so a baseline frequency of 200 or above if you do any form of frequency testing. Now, before you all go and panic and wonder how you do frequency testing and all of that type of stuff, this just means that you have had a spiritual awakening, that you have come out of that very mechanical victim level consciousness, which is below 200, that you've moved out of that state of consciousness and you're now starting to expand. Okay. So if you've had a spiritual awakening, if you are listening to this podcast episode, which is a podcast episode about the Akashic Records, I can almost guarantee with 99% certainty that your resonant frequency is above 200. So don't get too caught up in resonant frequencies. If you do want to learn about different frequencies and what they are and different states of consciousness, that's great. But what I don't want is anyone sitting there thinking, oh, well, I have to work that out first. Okay, the Akashic Records will always find you when you're ready. There is no mistake when you start to get interested about the Akashic Records, you start to hear about them, they pop up everywhere, you come across podcasts like this one. That's no mistake. And that's a sign that you're ready to start working with them. The last point I want to talk about is a method. Okay, so this is a very practical thing. You need a method to go into the Akashic Records. Now, for some of you, that method may be through meditation, okay? And that is completely fine. What I would say is if you are not a confident meditator, if you don't know the difference between the astral plane and the higher spiritual planes, I would advise against meditation for you specifically, because what can happen if you are going to do meditation, you can end up coming across one of the many fake versions of the Akashic Records that exist in the astral plane and not having a good experience there, not getting information, being told you're not able to access this information, you're not worthy of accessing it. I hear lots of different stories from lots of people who've come across one of these fake versions in the astral plane. And it's purely because as a meditator, they haven't got to the stage where they understand the different realms of consciousness. In my level 1 training, I do teach a method for meditators who are confident and who do understand the different realms. But if you don't, I would always recommend finding an alternative method. And in my training, that alternative method is via a prayer. And there are lots of different Akashic Records prayers out there. Mine is not public at this moment in time. Mine is only for my students. But a prayer method is very good because the frequency of the prayer, the words of the prayer, they are designed to shift your consciousness into the Akashic Records. So you don't have to worry about getting into a specific state of meditation. You just use the prayer. Of course, there's a process beforehand, grounding and setting intentions and all of that. But the prayer method is a very safe way to avoid coming across any of these fake versions of the Akashic Records. Of course, if you want to come along to my next level 1 training, if you're listening to this in May, my next level 1 training live is going to be taking place in September. You can get signed up for that over on my website, and I'll put a link in the show notes. If you're listening to this after September 2025, I am sure there will be my next live training dates. I run this class a couple of times a year, and It's a really good way for you to start learning how to access the Akashic Records, get information, and how to do some healing and clearing work in there for yourselves. My intention with this class is very much to empower you so that you have the Akashic Records as a tool that you can use throughout the rest of your spiritual journey. Thank you all for listening today. I do hope that this episode has given you a little bit of insight into what you need before you go into the Akashic Records. I hope it's inspired some of you to think, actually, I can do all of that. You know, I'm good enough for this. There's no reason I can't do this. And I hope to see lots of you in class in September. I will, of course, see you next week for the next episode.